This is the Build Wealth Canada podcast, episode number 40.
Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada show. Today, I'm excited to have John Kalos back on the show. And if that name sounds familiar, then you might have heard John on a previous episode of the show called How to Save Thousands at Your Bank, Secrets of an Ex-Banker, where John, as an ex-banker, shared some of his top tips and strategies to basically save you significant amounts of money when dealing with the banks here in Canada. In fact, it was actually the most downloaded episode in the show's history. So if you ever want to check that episode out, it's episode 30. So you can go to buildwealthcanada.ca/30 or just use whatever podcast player you're using, like iTunes, to find episode 30 there. It's a really, really good episode. Now, John is a fee-for-service financial planner, which means he isn't one of those financial planners that are really just there to sell you investments so that they can earn their bonus or commission. He actually doesn't get compensated to sell any investment product, so his advice is totally unbiased, and he is instead focused exclusively on providing just quality, financial planning advice to Canadians. So John has been in the industry for over 25 years, and his lack of bias and just general concern for the financial well-being of Canadians has made him one of the very few financial planners that I actually trust and go to whenever I want an unbiased second opinion or some analysis done on my own investments, in my own financial plan. In fact, last year, my wife and I hit our financial independence number, which basically means, our investments were large enough that we don't really have to work anymore. And so we both quit our job, and she retired while I decided to be semi-retired. And now one of the big questions that came up after we hit that milestone was how to change and optimize the investment portfolio that we have now that we're retired and semi-retired, meaning, when you no longer have two full-time salaries to pay for everything, how do you actually live off the investments? And the second big question that I had was, can you crunch and analyze our financials to see if we actually do have enough to retire? So I've done lots of financial planning for myself and for others, but I find that when it's your own money and your own financial plan, there's value in having another unbiased professional do your financial plan just to get a second opinion and ensure that what you have planned is optimized to the max, to basically maximize your results and lower your taxes, and to really have a second opinion in case you have any sort of biases that, since it is your own money and so you inherently want your numbers to work so that you can have an early retirement. So what I did is I approached John to see if he can be my family's financial planner and do an actual full financial plan for us. And then we can use our financial plan as a case study on the show so that other Canadians can get some insights on how to actually execute an early retirement, and at the same time, get a better understanding of what a financial plan should include, find out what it can do for you, and get some insider tips from a real ex-banker on what to look out for when you encounter a financial planner or advisor trying to sell you a service like that. All right, now before we dive into the episode, I did want to mention that if you do have some questions for John, or if you'd like to discuss potentially having him take a look at your financial situation too, just like he did with my family, then you can sign up for a free consultation with him by going to buildwealthcanada.ca/John. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/John, just JOHN. And that's, totally free. There's no obligation or anything like that. Now, before we get into all of that, I wanted to thank this episode's sponsor, which is paytm.ca, which is a free app that helps you manage all your bills in one place. Now, when I first heard about this, I thought, but I can already do this with my bank. Well, Paytm pays you to pay your bills. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, they run all kinds of different promotions, such as getting you up to 2% cash back on the bills that you pay through the app, and even as high as 10% cash back on certain purchases. And recently, they even gave away 2 iPhone 10s, each one worth over $1,300. And they also gave away an all-inclusive resort vacation just for members paying their bills through the app. Now, no bank in Canada is giving away that much when you pay your bills. Usually you get nothing when you pay your bills through just a regular bank. Now, as a sponsor of the show, Paytm is giving away $10 cash back to all Build Wealth Canada listeners when they make their first bill payment. And so to get that, just download the Paytm app from the Apple App Store or Google Play. And when you run the app, just choose the types of bills that you'd like to pay. And when you're paying that bill, enter the promo code BUILDWEALTH. And when you do that, you'll instantly get $10 cash back on that bill. So that promo code again is BuildWealth, all lowercase and no spaces, to get that $10 cash back. And you can also go to paytm.ca and download the app from there, where you, whether you're an Apple or an Android user. So once again, a big thank you to Paytm for supporting Build Wealth Canada. And now let's get into the show. All right, John, welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Cornell. Nice to be back again.
So, John, you and I went through the entire financial planning process together with you as our financial planner. And after you created the plan for our family, one of the insights that came out of it, which really goes against what we hear in the media a lot, is that if you were to retire or semi-retire now, you don't necessarily always need a $1 million or more investment portfolio to pull that off. So, for example, our portfolio wasn't at $1 million, and all the numbers supported that we still have enough for a full retirement right now. So, why do you think we often hear in the media how you need that $1 million or more portfolio, and why is this not necessarily always the case?
Well, as far as why we hear it in the media, that's very difficult to understand. I mean, every situation is different. Every person's lifestyle is different. You might have assets in the future that you can depend on for your retirement, and in which case you wouldn't need to save $1 million. Example, you might have a home right now that you're willing to downsize in the future. So that there's so many different variables that will make $1 million too much or not enough. If somebody wants a very high lifestyle, they'll need more than $1 million. If somebody is not going to be spending too much money, they're going to need less than $1 million. It depends if people have a pension that they can rely on as well. So there's just so many other variables that come into play to help us, or to try to help us figure out if $1 million or not is enough. That number comes out of nowhere as far as I'm concerned, because again, for some people $1 million won't be enough. For others it'll be very much. Some people want to leave a good amount of money for their children. Other people want to leave the house only for their children. Others are going to say, no, I work for everything myself, and that's how my children will do it as well. So it's a mythical number. It doesn't make sense. And I've never used that number myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know you have an interesting take on this too, because you're an ex-banker, right? I mean, you work in those banks, and I remember when we had a kind of a previous conversation a while back, you mentioned that the investment industry is set up in such a way that they want you to just keep saving as much as possible, because they get the fees off that, right? Like if you're buying a mutual fund or something like that, for example, right? So.
Yeah. You're so right, and I can tell you some other scare tactics that have been used, and I've heard this for many years now. I've been in the industry for a little over 20 years, and tactics, people will, advisors will tell you, don't depend on the Canada Pension Plan or old age security. That's going to be bankrupt by the time you're retired. That doesn't make sense. This has always been the case, and that's just not true. So that's one tactic. Another tactic is setting inflation expectations too high, which really skews, the amount of savings that you'll have to do to keep up. So there's many variables that unfortunately people use to scare people into saving more money. And the one way that I look at it is, if you're going to save all your money and not live now, well, you're going to be probably the richest person in a retirement home, and you won't be able to enjoy it. So no, let's not be victims to all the scare tactics that are out there.
For sure, yeah. I mean, if you're an advisor that gets a percentage of whatever the person is investing, it's so much easier to just say, you kind of put your head in the sand, just keep working indefinitely, keep saving as much as possible, because they just keep collecting kind of these fees. Once the conversation turns, okay, I think we're ready to retire now. Can you help us with our financial planning? How should we change things now that we're entering this new phase of our life? Now it becomes a much more involved process, right? It's no longer just as simple as write me a check or transfer this money into this mutual fund and that's it, we're done, right?
That's right.
Right. So now this conversation gets opened up, and then and if that advisor is just a kind of they call themselves an advisor, but they're really just a salesperson, right? And they don't have that kind of experience and expertise in actually planning someone's retirement. Then now they get scared, because now they think, oh well, maybe the person will take their assets and leave, or they'll start managing themselves, or something, or go start working with a fee for service financial planner like yourself, right? So I can see how the way the compensation works, right? How there is that incentive for people to just say, "Oh no, what you have is not enough. Keep working, keep your nose to the grindstone," right?
That's right. And unfortunately, most of the industry is built on commissions. And as you mentioned, when somebody is getting paid on commission based on the products that they sell, let's face it, there's a conflict of interest there. And needless to say, I'm not saying every advisor takes only that into consideration. There's lots of good advisors out there, but you have to keep in mind that if they're having a slow month, for example, and the next client walks in, well, there's a good chance that they're going to be sold a very expensive product that might not be suited for them. So there's a lot that people have to navigate through, and a lot of things that they need to know before they actually start working with a financial planner. And hopefully this is something that we can sort of address in what we're doing right now, Cornell.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I totally get what you're saying, how just how you don't need as much as you may think. Like one number I heard a lot was like, 70%. You need 70% of your income in retirement, but that's such a generic number, right? It doesn't go very, very deep. It makes so many assumptions, right? Like that you're going to spend 70% of your kind of pre-retirement income in retirement. I mean, like there's things like just several things come to mind, right? Like, well, you need a second car in retirement. Well, you could probably get away with just having one because you're not commuting to work anymore, right? Like if you're living with a partner or whatever. And then also, are you living in an expensive part of the country? Like if you're working in Toronto and then you retire, you don't have to keep living in Toronto. You can move somewhere where it's much less expensive to live. And so now you've just freed up all this money you might have had in an expensive house there or an expensive condo, right? So, there's all these other variables, right, that aren't being factored in when someone just says, oh yeah, you need 70%. That's the rule, something like that.
Exactly. And you mentioned an important point is the fact of, where do you want to live when you retire? As you mentioned, will you need one car or two? On the other hand, you might need more than 70% because what if your health is not in good shape at that point? What if you're going to need, care that is not covered by our Medicare? So as you said, there are just too many variables, and we can actually spend a whole show going over all of the variables, but there's just so much that needs to be, let's say, digested by the financial planner. And this is where the initial interview with a financial planner and subsequent interviews play such a big role in trying to figure out how much money you need to save. So as you saw when we started, talking and when we went through the process that we have, the first interview was basically, let's talk about what your goals are, what your needs are. Let's talk about, what you don't know. So a very a big overview of what you're looking for and what your goals are going forward. That's the most important aspect. And that's where, you start getting an idea of what a client looks for. And then, after a couple of meetings, you can start saying, this is what you need to do. And give a little bit more, concrete recommendations.
For sure. Instead of just going off like a headline or like a quote by some financial kind of guru, which maybe applies in general, but may not necessarily apply to your situation, right? So
and you know what? We can't even use the word general. Everyone's different.
Yeah.
Every family situation is different. If somebody's inheriting a lot of money, from their parents in the future, or if there's any other kind of windfall, well, needless to say, they don't have to save as much money. On the other hand, if somebody has a lot of money and they want to leave, as I mentioned earlier, money to their kids, well, then everything changes and every family is different. That's why every financial plan that I've done is completely different. There's no such thing as rule of thumb and what have you.
Yeah. And you bring up an interesting point. Maybe your spending will actually be more than 70%. That's quite possible too, right? Like if like you mentioned the health example, and then you mentioned the parents too, right? Like if you're inheriting, but what if there's the reverse of, let's say your parents didn't maybe plan enough for their retirement or something happened that prevented them from, saving as much as they ideally would like to have saved. Now maybe you have to take care of your parents financially in their old age as well, right? Exactly. on top of your own family, right? So yeah, that's a good point. I mean, like in our case, the number is well below 70, but I can totally see how in some circumstances it could even be over 70, especially if you have other families relying on you for income.
Correct. And that's why I told you also, Cornell, we've done a plan, right? That's not where it ends. This is where the relationship begins. So every year, or I'd say once or twice a year, a plan has to be reviewed for the reason that you just brought up, which is there's things will change going forward. I'm the one who told you the plan that we have right now might not be the same plan 5 or 6 years from now, because life changes, situations change, employment changes, health changes. So every year we need to readjust, and we need to create something new based on what the circumstances are at that point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing to get used to, that okay, you're doing this plan, but a year from now we may have to make some very significant tweaks, because different things could happen. So
exactly. Or we might say everything stays the same because nothing has changed.
Right.
But we need to do a review on a regular basis, because the truth is life changes, and there's just too many variables out there that can affect planning.
For sure. Yeah. No, that's great. So let's go into doing a case study using myself as an example, just so that we kind of have that real life case study as opposed to just some hypotheticals or just theory. So,
Right.
we'll focus on how to execute an early retirement, or at least an early semi-retirement. So to start, what I thought I'll do is I'll mention the objectives and questions that I came to you with. And I think this will give listeners kind of a good preview of what we'll cover in the episode. And I think that, since these were things that I wanted to address, and I think likely other Canadians have these questions too. So I think it'll be kind of, applicable to everyone, even so, we'll kind of keep it, like we'll use real life examples, but at the same time, we'll kind of keep it so that everybody can still kind of learn from it and apply it to their own lives. So, so let's go over kind of some of the goals. So, when I approached you about this initially, I basically finished analyzing all my own numbers. So I'm kind of a big, money geek as well, right? And
you are?
yeah. So I mean, before I even approached you, right? I mean, I had I have another financial planning software that I use, Snap Projections, which I really like. And then there's and then I have my Excel spreadsheets and and all this analysis that I've done, and all my so I've tested it out. Everything is pointing that yes, we can retire either fully or semi-retirement. Whatever we want, we can do it at this point. But I really wanted to have someone. Like an expert like yourself, with all kind of your 25 plus years of experience, check over my calculations, check over my analysis, just to make sure that I didn't make a mistake somewhere, and basically confirm, saying, can you confirm that yes, my numbers are right? Yes, can we in fact fully retire, or can we, or semi-retire, whichever, let's look at both of them, and if so, what's the optimal way to structure everything in the retirement? So, I really wanted to ensure that, we're optimized properly from an investment perspective, and a tax point of view as well. So, looking at our RSPs, TFSA, looking at our non-registered accounts, if we're for semi-retirement, are we using those properly now that, my wife's retired? Let's say I'm semi-retired or fully retired. Do we have to make any sort of tweaks when we get there? And the tweaks that I think I should make, are those the correct tweaks, kind of based on your experience? So, just, making sure we're keeping the right investments in the right accounts, having things optimized, having things tax efficient, and also making sure that we're not missing out on anything, any sort of strategies or anything like that can further reduce taxes, further grow our investments, right? So just kind of picking your brain based on all your experience, because you never, it's kind of like, you don't know what you don't know, right? And kind of the way I look at it is like, even if you're like, let's say, a world-class engineer, when you're working on a project, you probably, it's a good idea to still have other engineers who you trust and respect look at your work to make sure that, okay, is there a way to make it even more optimal? Is there a way to make it more efficient? Did you make a mistake somewhere, right? Because I find too, like when you're doing your own numbers and you're crunching your own things, I was afraid that I might have a bias of some sort, right? Like because it's it's my money, right? So
and you want to see it work, you want to make it work.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I want to make exactly, right. So I was like, what, this will be good to get like an unbiased type of someone that just kind of does it all independently. Like you're using a different software, you're doing your own your own kind of assumptions, which turned out to be different than mine sometimes too, right? Like some of yours were actually more I would say yours were more conservative than mine. Like you used a more conservative rate of return. You made some CPP and OAS assumptions that were more conservative than what I had. So I thought that was really good, right? Because you kind of like stress tested it even more than I did to make sure that things are still okay. So I don't know, like that definitely put me at ease going through that whole whole process.
Right.
So I mean, we'll keep things actionable here just so that all listeners can actually apply what's being taught, as opposed to just let's talk only about Cornell and things that only apply to him. But I did want to stress the importance of having a financial plan done like this, that's basically customized to your specific situation. Just because there's so many nuances and things can get pretty, I find, they can get pretty complicated, especially from a taxation standpoint. So that if you want to optimize things, to pay the least amount of tax possible, while earning a good return based on your circumstances and your risk tolerance, you do want things kind of custom made, because like you said already, right, everybody is different, right? So I do think there's a need for an unbiased second set of eyes just to kind of objectively look at your plan and evaluate everything, right? So, like I've done financial planning for others in the past, I've been trained on how to do it, and I still wanted I still wanted a second set of eyes just to go over everything, due to how important it is, right? And just to be, just for someone else to have a completely unemotional look and say, okay, no, these are the cold hard facts, right? There's no emotion to it. So, and remove kind of any biases. So to give everyone listening some actionable things they can do when searching for a financial planner, you're looking to get a financial plan done, looking for a financial planner that's right for them. What are the red flags that you look out for when that listeners of the podcast should look out for when they're trying to find a good financial planner or a good financial advisor?
All right. Well, there are a few, and I'll start with the first one, which I think people fall sort of trap into, and that's the free financial plan. Now, when you hear that there's anything that's given to you for free, you should be asking questions. If now, what tends to happen in the industry is, and mostly in banks and there's other independent firms that offer you a free financial plan. You got to remember that they got to make their money somehow, and basically, what a free financial plan is, it's sort of like something that'll get you curious and interested in buying their products, and that's where they make their money. So all I'm saying is that if somebody's offering you something for free, they're making their money some way else. And that's typically from commissions on expensive products that you're going to sell you. So that's how, when I did your plan, Cornell, it took me hours and hours and hours and going over it several times. And that's a lot of time off my back. So this is how a professional financial planner gets compensated, is by charging for the plan. And then when it's time to implement the plan, typically independent financial planners use instruments that are much less expensive than what you would get through a mutual fund or anything like that. So that's, getting something for free, which is a document basically which will spell out how you should be planning your investments, or your life for that matter, is a lot of hard work. And anything that's there for free, there's usually a catch to it, and the catch usually is you're going to be paying a lot of money for the products that you're going to sell you. So that's flag number one, which I think is very, very important. Flag number two, if you're setting up a first initial meeting with a financial planner, that meeting should only be to get an idea of who you are and what you're looking for. If somebody asks you to bring in your statements, well, what they're trying to do is size you up to see how much money you have, to see if it's worth speaking to you again in the future. So that doesn't make sense either. So anyone who says, bring your statements and we can take a look at things, that's another red flag as far as I'm concerned. If product is brought up in the first meeting, that should be another indication that you're probably dealing with somebody who only has product on their mind. So if, you walk in and you say, I'm looking for, a retirement plan, and they start saying, well, you know what you should do? You should buy some Canadian stock or some Canadian mutual funds, which have always, done better than GICs, for example. If a discussion starts, or in a first meeting, if a discussion includes actual investment products, that should be a red flag as well. I mean, I can go on and on, but there's a couple of other things that are very important. If you find somebody that you feel comfortable with and you're ready to start a relationship, make sure that they have what's called a letter of engagement. It's a document that spells out exactly what their services are, exactly how much money you'll be paying, and what will be covered. That's a letter of engagement that's signed by the financial planner. It's signed by the client as well, and it's a very good guideline. And if you're not getting that when you're ready to do business with a financial planner, that's another big red flag as far as I'm concerned. A good financial planner should also encourage you to speak to some of the other clients that the planner has to get an idea how things have gone. So they should be able to refer you several clients that will tell you how things have gone with that planner. So if they're not offering, or I should say, the client should actually ask for people that they can sort of get a referral from, or get a reference from. And if they're not willing to give you anything like that, well, that's another red flag as far as I'm concerned. It means that they're not confident in themselves. So those are a couple. And as I mentioned to you, there are other things. Definitely, maybe I'll end with this. Definitely make sure that you're going to get a financial plan, because it still surprises me in this day and age how many planners are not providing financial plans. It's incredible. And the product should always be the last thing that's on the table. Financial plans need to be created, because if you don't have a roadmap of where you want to go, you're never going to get there. So those, in 3 or 4 minutes, those are the red flags that I think are the most important ones out there. And also, if you have a first impression or a gut feeling, let's say when you're interviewing somebody or when you're sitting down with somebody, go with your gut feeling. If you feel that something is missing, or you're not understanding what you're saying, or they're not talking your language, that's another sign that this might not be the right person. There's plenty of people out there. It could take some time to find somebody good. It's always good, to get referrals. It's always good to get, you can go to the Financial Planning Standards of Canada and see, certified financial planners in your area that they can refer you towards. And here's another one. I'm always saying I'm going to end with this one, but here's a good one. Look at their business card. If their title is financial planner, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a certified financial planner. If you see on their business card the word advisor with an E versus advisor with an O, advisor with an O is not a certified financial planner. So there's all these little nuances that people don't know, but that are so important. And hopefully, with your show here, we're giving people a lot of advice as to what to look for, when we're looking for a financial planner.
For sure. And your first tip kind of got me thinking of a quote. So when you said, watch out for this quote unquote, free financial plan, free advice. Right. I remember reading a quote once that says that, the most expensive advice is the free advice that you get.
That's right.
Like when you're like, whether it's like a legal advice or financial planning advice. Let's say you're in a big legal thing. Are you going to go for some free legal advice? Well, no, if the stakes are high, like let's say you're buying a house, you're going to you want to go with a good lawyer, right? Because it's a pretty big, deal, right? And same with financial planner, right? Like this is supposed to be saving for your retirement. This is supposed to prevent you from eating cat food when you're retired.
Exactly.
So, like stakes are high. If you have kids, they're dependent on you, financially and such, right? So, I mean, these are big, critical decisions. So do you really want to go for this, free advice, even though, and like you said, it's not actually free, right? Because they just get paid on the back end, right? With the products they sell you, right? So, yeah.
It's very important what you're saying. And you know what we're saying, don't go the free route. And that makes a lot of sense. But you also want to make sure that you're not paying fees for no reason. And let me tell you what I mean. Typically, you go to a bank, for example, or a stockbroker or whatever, you get a free financial plan. Then you get your money invested and you're paying 2.5% to have that money invested for you. Whereas you can go to a financial planner, they'll charge you for a plan. But typically, I say typically, overall, when you're dealing with a person who's not being paid based on the product that they sell, typically your overall costs go down, and they go down significantly. Mm-hmm. And the tools that I like using for implementing a plan and getting people's money invested are very, very cheap compared to what most people out there use. And I'm going to say mutual funds are very expensive. Mutual funds are good tools for people that are starting out and don't have a lot of experience, but it's extremely expensive. So free plan plus expensive mutual funds gets you a lot of fees for nothing. Mm-hmm. And people don't realize that because fees are usually hidden and they don't even come up in a conversation, for crying out loud. And this still happens in this day and age. people should get educated about these things. And for that matter, planners should be, completely transparent and say exactly what the fees are. But that's not done these days. And that's where the letter of engagement comes into play that I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I really like the process that you and I went through when you did our financial plan. And I think it's a really good example of what the process should be like. So now that you've talked a bit about sort of the negative things to look out for and what we don't want, can you give us a brief overview of your process? And I know this is something you've been optimizing for, like 20 plus years. So can you also highlight the critical pieces in the process that everyone should have when working with a financial planner, whether they're working with you or just any financial planner for that matter?
Right. So let me start off with saying this. Every step in the process is critical because, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So every step of the process has a lot of information and a lot of things that need to be taken into account before anything is done. So the process that I use, and as you mentioned, you've gone through the exact same process, is typically a client will come and ask for help. All right. And so basically we set up a first interview, and what that interview concerns is, as I mentioned, I specifically say don't bring any statements or anything like that, because that's not what we're going to be talking about. It's just that people are used to having them bring statements to a first interview because that's just how the majority of the industry operates. But it's not a good idea to have that. Let's just talk about what your issues are, what your concerns are, what you know about tax planning. The questions in the first interview are basically, have you done any retirement planning in the past? Do you know when you want to retire? Do you know if you want to retire? I have, business owner clients who say retirement. What the hell is retirement? There's no, I love what I do. And it doesn't look like I'm ever going to retire. So people have different, objectives. And this is what we need to go through in the first meeting. Have you ever done any education planning for children? Your insurance needs, estate planning. So we're going through the overview of what you've done and what your concerns are, and that's the discussion that we have in a first meeting. So once a first meeting is done, what I like to encourage clients is I say, and even before we meet, I typically say, our first meeting will give you a chance to see what we do and how we're, and if we're able to help you, because you'll have an idea of what you need and you'll get an idea of what we do and if we're able to help you. It'll also give me an idea of if I can help you based on what you're looking for, because there are certain clients where we've said it doesn't make sense for a variety of reasons, but that first meeting, at the end of the meeting, that's the objective, to find out if it sounds like a good fit and sounds like it could be mutually beneficial if we work together. If we see that this is the case after first meeting, then we go on to the second meeting where the details come out a little bit more. At that point, I will ask a prospective client to bring a slew of information, including their tax returns, their wills if they have any bank statements as far as mortgage, investments are concerned, or anything like that, as much information as possible. And at that point, we'll go through all that information. And once we have, once I get a very good feeling of what it is or how you look and what it is that you're looking for, then I'll be able to confidently say, you know what, I think I'm able to help you. And it also gives, again, the chance for the client to sort of kick our tires and say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. So that's the process, at least the first two steps. Excuse me, I'm just taking a little drink of water.
Sure.
You can hear, Cornell, my voice is not at 100%. It's not at karaoke level, right?
That's right.
And if I'll just quickly tell everybody, we've been planning this show for weeks now, but I went through laryngitis and it's still not 100%, but we figured let's go ahead and do it anyways. So please excuse me if I'm turning you off with my voice, but I figured, and we both figured, that it's important to get this out there now because it's RSP season also, and people tend to think about these things a little bit more in February. So I thought it was a good idea to get this going, whether my voice is 100% or not. So if I'll be pausing every so often to drink a little bit of water, please excuse me. So at that point, we've done the second meeting. It all makes sense. We look at the letter of engagement word for word, we get it signed, and then we start the planning process where I'll ask you some more questions to figure out what your goals are. And then a presentation of your financial plan is done, whether it's in person or whether it's over the phone or with technology these days. I got clients across Canada, so we were able to do what we did together, over the computer and over the phone, and everything went well. So that's when the planning process starts, and I go through the typical questions and some not so typical questions to figure out exactly what you want. We'll look at obviously your personal information. We'll look at the sources of retirement income that you have, including the Canada pension plan, old age security. Is there any windfall coming in for you in the future? We'll assess the personal assets that you have right now, TFSAs, RSPs, anything else like that. And then we'll prepare a plan that'll show you basically where you are today, where you want to be tomorrow, and what are the steps that you need to take to get there. And I basically show different proposals, different solutions. Like when we looked at your choices, Cornell, when it comes to retirement, I showed you several things, right? I basically told you, with the assets that you have and with what you're looking for when it comes to retirement, well, you have a few options. You can based on the numbers, you can increase your lifestyle if you want. In other words, if you want to spend X amount of dollars, well, you know what? You have enough money to spend X plus another $10,000 or $20,000. That's one choice. Or you can, reduce your retirement age. In your case, you can go ahead and retire right now if you want. But typically, I might see somebody who says, I want to retire at 60. And I'll tell them, well, based on what we've talked about, you could retire at 55, or you know what, it's not very realistic. You need to retire at 65. So there's different options. I told you that if you wanted to, based on your goals again, and based on the income that you want and the amount of assets that you have, you can take less risk in your portfolio.
Right.
You don't need to have 80% in equity or 50% in equity. Believe it. I mean, there are some people that come with investment with their statements where they're fully invested in equities. They're not very comfortable with the risk factor once I've told them, what the best case and worst case scenarios are. And when they find out that they don't even need to take so much risk or accept so much volatility, I mean, you see it's sort of like a relief, because I tell them you don't need 8% to retire. You need more like 4. And that can be done a lot easier in more conservative ways. So that's another option. Take less risk. Or, I can show a client that you don't have to have so much money in equity or so much money in bonds. So there's different options that are available once the analysis is done.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that definitely got my gears turning, because I was always, 100% equities. I took kind of that approach.
Yeah.
And then, but when we had that meeting, you were like, Cornell, you really don't have to do that anymore, right?
Right.
So,
and you know what?
Yeah,
I wasn't encouraging you to become more conservative.
Yeah.
But I was also telling you, what if
Right.
this year we have a repeat of 2008, 2009? And you know what? These past couple of days, right? It's it got the wheels turning. And as long as people know what the choices are and what the consequence of each choice is, positives and negatives, then they can make an educated decision. And I'm there to help them make that decision if they want my opinion. But we'll always have a choice, the positive consequences and the negative consequences of each choice, and then we make an informed decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I liked your approach, right? Because it wasn't like you're like, oh, Cornell, you gotta do it this way. It was more like, look, just think about these options, because you have these options available to you.
That's right. That's right.
You don't necessarily have to be all equities anymore. Like before, for me, it was a no-brainer to be all equities, because it's like, well, if you want to do the early retirement thing, I need to really try to go for maximum returns, right? So that was so I just kind of went, autopilot on all equities, and that was my thing. Even though I've mentioned before, like I don't recommend that for everyone, because that's obviously a very kind of aggressive allocation. But
correct.
But it was kind of, but you kind of said, Cornell, you're kind of transitioning now, right? Because you've reached kind of that financial independence number. So are you do you really want to keep doing that? Which long term you'll end up further ahead if you keep doing the all equities thing, but realize you totally don't need to do that anymore
That's
to
right.
hit some goal, right? So think about it at
Correct.
least, right? Yeah.
And you know what? When somebody is at the board, let's say somebody's at the borderline of, I have enough, but it's not. I'm not terribly comfortable with the amount of money I have, and you're retiring. Well, if you're withdrawing money from your portfolio to live, and your portfolio goes down 50%, holy cow, you're in trouble. And this is things that we saw in 2008 and 2009. So there are things that you can do to protect yourself from things like from the markets, but just know that as long as you know the choices and what the consequence of each choice is, well then that's the best way of doing it. And then adapting as we go forward, adapting to the changes in the market, adapting to the changes in your life. That's probably the best way that I can tell people to do it. Just have some goals, stick with them. They might change, and if they do, change your plan, but always have a few choices of what needs to be done.
For sure. Yeah, it was just good to have that sort of selection of options, right? And then I got to look at them and say, okay, do we still want to keep on this route, or do we want to change things a bit? But it's just, yeah, it was nice to, and that was kind of the other thing, right? Like, even though I study this stuff all the time and I do, my own, finances and all that, that was another good example of where having kind of that second set of eyes that's totally independent of you to take a look at it and say, hey, Cornell, at least consider this at this point. You know what I mean? Whereas if it wasn't for you, I probably would have been like, just because sometimes it's really easy to keep going on autopilot, especially if things have worked out well for you, doing it a certain way, like it has in our case. Things have worked out really well because I did things a certain way and that kind of a thing. But then it's good to say, okay, well, when things change a little bit, like in our case, if we're to move to semi-retirement or fully retirement, then you want someone to sort of say, hey, let's actually take a step back now, because now it's time to actually reevaluate. So so I found that was really valuable, because it kind of got my head out of the sand a little bit and be like, hey, let's look at other options that maybe we didn't consider before, because it was like, oh, retirement's years and years away, or
that's
years
right.
away,
and you know what else, Cornell, in your situation, obviously, and in many people's situation right now, remember, we've gone through the biggest bull market I think we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And people tend to have a short memory, I should say. It's been close to 10 years where the markets have pretty much gone straight up. So people get they turn down the radar, let's say. And I'm here to say, you have to consider that there could be major corrections. There will be major corrections. The markets are going to drop significantly. Is that going to happen today, a month from now, a year from now, or 5 years from now? Nobody knows. But you have to keep that in mind and not just say, I know I can do 8% a year for the next 30 years. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So, and this is where you have to adapt, and where your financial planner has to adapt along with you.
Yeah. And I remember kind of when we had that conversation, you actually went in and I was using 8% return for my assumptions, because I was like, I'm going to keep doing all equities. So if I keep doing all equities, then 8% actually, I would say, more on the conservative side. Like if you look at kind of historically, it's all equity portfolios generate more than 8%. That's right. Historically, right? But you're like, okay, Cornell, let's do a lower number. I think we use 6% or something like that. Especially because you're like, hey, well, what if down the road, in the near or medium future, you decide, hey, you know what, let's do a little fixed income just to keep things a little bit more stable, keep things a little bit less volatile, right? And so so that was kind of another interesting thing to say. Yeah, let's use a lower number, because it's probably shouldn't assume I'm gonna. Is it wise to assume I'm going to be in equities 100% equities my entire life? Let's see what happens if I'm not.
You're not going to be. I hope you're not going to be when you're 75 or 70. In those years, you're taking huge risks if you're going to be all in equity at that point. And again, on your side, your goals are achievable. You're not asking for the sky. You don't want to spend $100,000 a year, so it all makes sense. And so in your case, we've, as you mentioned, stress tested your portfolio, where even if you're making almost 0%, most of your costs are covered, right? So I mean, and that's a great situation to be in. So you can afford to take maybe a little bit more risk. On the other hand, I'd rather say, let's use a conservative number, and if we get better results than that, then great, cherry on the cake.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so John, when you did my plan, there were several key components that you made sure you factored in that could really make a huge impact on whether someone can retire early or not. So for anybody looking to do an early retirement or an early semi-retirement, what were these key components that can really shorten the number of years you need to work? And let's break this question down kind of into two parts. So the first is, let's talk about the controllable factors, which, we can all kind of focus on, things we can actually, do, that have this biggest impact on how early we can retire. And then after that, let's talk about the factors that we can't control directly, but that absolutely need to be factored into the financial plan, no matter who your financial planner advisor is, just because they have such a big impact on your ability to retire early as well. So like, here I'm referring to like a lot of the government related things, for example.
Right. And other things that are uncontrollable completely, like inflation. But excuse me. So let's start with the parts that you can control. And obviously the biggest aspect which is under your control is your spending. Warren Buffett said the best way to make money is to save it. And unfortunately we live in an era or a society where we're making $100 and we're spending 120. That's not sustainable. So the controllable aspects are obviously living within your means. If you're making, if I wasn't saving money every day of my life, I couldn't sleep at night. I'm a financial planner, I guess maybe that's why. But I'm just saying everybody obviously has to live within their means, and that's going to hit home when, not if, but when interest rates rise, okay? And I think that's going to be a scary time for a lot of people. So the first aspect is, spending less money and making sure you're saving money. Another aspect that you can control, and like in your part, is, are you going to work part-time when you retire or during your retirement years? So I think the best answer to that is, and one question that we answered for you is, you want to work part-time, okay, because you enjoy it, but you also want to be in a position where if you're not enjoying it, you want to be able to say, that's it, I'm done. So if you can find yourself, if anybody can find themselves in a situation like that, then great. If you want to retire from your day job and you can do some sort of, part-time gig on the side, and then, have enough money to be in retirement, then that's pretty much like an ideal world. So the question is, will somebody want to have some sort of, side job when they're retired? And a lot of people, whether they like it or not right now, are faced with that because, again, savings hasn't been, too high. And there's lots of people saying millennials are never going to retire, which I don't agree with. Okay. But if they continue, or if people continue on the same track that they've been doing over the past, 15, 20 years and more, well, there's going to be retirement ages of 70 and 75 coming down the road. That's a fact. So control your spending, and obviously try to look for other sources of income that can come towards you when you retire. Mm-hmm. So those are pretty much the controllable aspects: spending less and seeing if you can find some sort of part-time job to compensate you, or to give you a little bit extra income when you retire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and John, just to kind of just to add to that, especially about the part-time income piece, because I remember when I was kind of crunching my own numbers and all that, I made the assumption that I'm going to just, we're saving for a full-blown retirement. We're never going to generate another dollar of income, whether it's through a side gig or part-time work or whatever, and that's all my modeling and all that's like all the models I built and stuff. It was all making that assumption. And then, once we sort of hit that number, I was like, you know what? I want to just stop working 100%. I'm in my, I'm 33 right now, right? So, what am I going to do, working. Right? Yeah. You just started working. So it's like, why? What am I going to do? There's got to be, it's just not realistic. I don't think it would be I think I wouldn't find it very fulfilling to just be fully retirement when being that young. Like, there's only so much, like TV and and walks you can go on and stuff. So that was a mistake I would say I made in my numbers, was I just kind of assumed this this zero income world. And what's interesting is I read a lot of for other bloggers that are kind of have reached financial independence very early as well. And what's interesting is that all of them still generate just quite a bit of income just from their side gigs, right? So every single one of them, and it's interesting because they made the same mistake I did. At least all the ones that I follow, was that they also made the assumption that they're fully retiring, they're not going to generate any income, and after being doing it, so you go on your vacation, you have a nice meal to celebrate or whatever, but after a while, you're gonna do something that makes some money. But I guess the difference is you're doing it because you like it, and the money is a bonus, as opposed to you're doing it because you have to pay the bills or whatever, right?
Correct.
And that makes such a huge impact on your numbers. It's insane what a big. Well, you saw like with ours, right? Like that makes a monumental. I know we can still fully retire, but just the semi-retirement alone makes such a huge impact on how much we can spend every year. Just because, it's wild what a big difference it makes.
No, absolutely. And again, I'm going to come back to the point where everyone's different. Okay, the semi-retirement or the part-time work is not for everybody. Also, some people say, what, work is work, and when I retire, I want to be done with work, and I want to be doing whatever I want, whether it's making me money or not. So we need to plan for that as well. And then again, life changes. You might find something that you're very interested in, which you'll have to take into account, or which you should take into account when you're planning again going in the future. So everyone's different, Cornell. Some people will do part-time work, some people won't. If some people love something and they're doing it and they can earn money doing it, then great. Then obviously you can probably semi-retire. But it all comes down to getting all that information down on paper and then working with it to come up with different options.
For sure. Yeah, I think in my case it's more like I look like if I was 70 right now, right, then the conversation might be very different, right? I may be like tired of working because I've been working, So those I think that's different, right? Like if you've been working in a full-time job, from your early 20s to 60 or 65, like my mother-in-law just retired, right? Like so she's been working her whole life. I totally don't blame her for wanting to totally stop working.
Right,
she's been working full-time for her whole life almost, right? So I totally I get that 100%. But I think when I see people who are early retired, like in their 30s, for example, right? Mm-hmm. I find a lot of times too, right? Like at least everyone that I follow and myself too, like there's certain passions you want to pursue, and that maybe you didn't have time to do or didn't have as much time to do because you were kind of working full time. And so when you're not working full time anymore, you can pursue those things. And, not surprisingly, if it's a passion and you love it, a lot of times those passions can also bring in some money on the side, right? So,
correct.
So it's just a very different, so that's why I haven't seen anyone that's, retired early in their 30s and are just like, no, I've been relaxing for 2 years so far, and that's all I'm going to do the rest of my life. I just haven't met anyone like that yet.
It's all priorities. Every generation is different. And you know what, Cornell, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, you might change. I'm a little older than you are. Okay, I turned 50 a couple of days ago. So your perspective changes. Your family gets older. Some people might not have kids and they will have kids. Things change. So this is why I always say things change. So a financial plan is not etched in stone. It needs to be molded and needs to be massaged as you go on in life.
Right. It helps you make the best decisions you can with the information you have right now, basically, and then you tweak it accordingly. Yeah,
exactly. Now, some of the things that we say those are things we could control, but you mentioned Canada Pension Plan, Old Age Security. I just want to tell people, there are some people there that don't know these things. If you're working, you're contributing to the Canada Pension Plan, and you're going to get a pension from Canada. So those numbers are available. And I always have clients, show me their statement of participation. Basically, it's a statement that says how much money you can expect from your Canada Pension Plan. You also have Old Age Security that everyone gets, every Canadian gets. And so these are numbers that have to be put in as well. The biggest number which can make a real big difference is inflation. So when I did your plan, if I increased inflation by 1% or 1.5% a year, it makes a world of a difference. And for that matter, if I reduce inflation. So, if we're going to find ourselves, 4 or 5 years from now, at, inflation at 10%, that's a game changer and it changes everything. So these factors are very important, and these factors we can't control, but we can definitely take them into account as they happen to figure out what we're going to do. So the inflation number is really something, though. If we assume 5% inflation a year going forward, your plan is finished, and you're going to go back to work, guy, versus 2.5% or 3%. And the financial planning standards, and here in Quebec, the IQPF sets certain rates as to where they feel we should be using when we're doing financial plans. And right now, inflation is at like 2.25%, 2.5%. I like using 3% just in case, but anywhere between 2.5% and 3% as an inflation number is not a bad idea. Remember, I lived through the 10% inflation where I saw chocolate bars go from 25 cents to 50 cents in a year type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that we have to take into account as well.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, very quickly, this doesn't happen too often, but it happens, and that's pension plans from companies. You might think you can depend on a pension plan, and then when you're 20 years down the road, when you need your pension, the pension money's not there. That happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's happened to obviously people from Nortel. It's there's other stories that are out there where people are saying they're going to get 50 cents to the dollar, that basically what they were expecting with their pension. So
yeah,
these are things that are again out of our control, and we have to put them in there. But if things change, we need to take them into account and replan everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even I didn't look into it too deeply, but I remember I saw something about Sears recently, right? Because they're obviously kind of going out of business, right? And so there was some article I noticed too where people were kind of trying to fight to make sure they still get their full pension. I don't know how it ended up resulting, but it is like it's a real thing, right? To be on your mind if your whole retire, or not whole, but if a big portion of retirement is dependent on a particular employer. What happened when that employer goes away, right?
Certainly.
And I mean, Sears, Nortel, huge companies, right? I mean, so you can't have that like, oh, they're too big to fail kind of deal. Like, well,
right.
It can definitely happen, right?
Right.
But yeah, the CBP OAS thing's a big thing, because I can see it being a bit daunting if someone does their own numbers, and if they don't factor that in, it could be like, oh, I need so much to retire. This is like, there's no way I can achieve that, right? But then once CBP and OAS kicks in, that can really make that does make a really, really big difference. So you could have a bit of an early retirement. You're using your RRSP TFSA money, for example. You're non-registered Army before you start getting those, and then once you hit the right age, your CPP and OAS kick in, and now you're getting that income. So there's different ways to structure it, so that you don't need this just insane amount of money, this giant amount of money, because this whole time you've made this assumption that you never get CPP and OAS, which is not realistic.
And also, as I mentioned a little earlier, if you're living in a home and you have a couple of children, at 65 or at 60 or whatever, you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily going to be there. You can downsize and go into a condominium, and there's an extra $100,000, for example, or but it all depends where you live. And as we said earlier, you can go outside of the city and you're going to get, far cheaper real estate or, a home. So all of these, there's just so many things that have to be taken into account.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like the biggest expenses are what? Taxes, your home, or like, where you live, and transportation, right? Like the cars, right? So if you can optimize things from a tax perspective, move somewhere that's less expensive, like in less expensive city, or lower, move to a smaller home. Yeah, and then go down to one car, let's say, because you're retired now, and both you and your partner don't each need to have a car anymore. I mean, things like that can make a huge impact.
Absolutely, and that's where a good financial planner comes into play, that brings out these things,
right,
and gives you choices to have, not just telling you, let's buy an RSP this year and let's put it in Canadian equity, for example. That's just not,
right.
That's really the last thing that comes into play.
That's right. Yeah, because it's more about, well, should this even be in the RSP at all? Should we be using our TFSA instead, right? And then
should people have RSPs to begin with?
Should we even have it? Yeah, are we in the tax bracket to really take advantage of it? Yeah, like there's all these things, right?
There's too much. I very quickly, I'll say this. I'm going through a situation now with a client where I've told him, you have too much money in your RSP right now, because when he's going to start withdrawing money from his RSP, he's going to be forced to take out money, which is going to be taxed, that he won't need. So there are situations where an RSP is not the best thing, but that's, again, that goes along with, I'm able to look at, people's situation and everything about them and figure out if it's a good idea or not. There are circumstances where it's not a good idea to take an RSP. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
But you'll never hear that. You'll never hear that in the media or when you walk into your bank, because that's how they make money, right?
Right, exactly.
So,
Yeah, it's in the RSP. It's kind of locked into an extent, right? And so it's people don't withdraw really from it, right? Unless for the most part. So it's an easy thing to sell investments for, I think, right?
Correct.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I heard that's a pretty big issue with some older Canadians, in that they when they kind of got into investing, the TFSA wasn't even around, right? Like RRSP was like the kind of only game in town,
right.
And so now they've put like your client, right? Like where they've just put so much money into it now, and it's grown substantially, which is good. But now if they don't start withdrawing it early enough, they're going to be forced to take out much bigger amounts that could actually make them jump to higher tax brackets. So there's a lot of like tax efficiency planning that goes around that.
Exactly. And they suffer also, or they risk getting their old age security clawed back.
Right.
So at a certain level, the government says, well, you know what, you don't need us anymore, so we won't give you the money that you deserve.
Right.
So there's so many things that have to be taken into account, and that's definitely one of them.
For sure. Yeah, it's like you get hit a few times, right? Like first with the mandatory, RSP withdrawals through the RIF, right? And then CBP comes in, OAS comes in. All of a sudden, you could, if you don't plan this correctly, you could actually be in a higher tax bracket when you're retired than before you were retired, which is not supposed to be and the whole purpose of RSP, right, was to put money into it so that you can withdraw it when you're in a lower tax bracket. So,
and I'm just looking at your income tax line here that I showed you on the plan, and you're in good shape. But there are cases where you'll be in a higher tax bracket when you retire, and that's a no-no.
Yeah. I remember we talked about that. We put that on like the next thing to talk about.
That's correct. If you're earning income, or if you have assets, right now that you're not going to need when you retire, well, there's different strategies that we can use now to make those assets grows in a tax-free environment.
For sure. Yeah. So we're definitely gonna have we're definitely gonna talk about that. Yeah, because that's when I saw those numbers, I was like, okay, we really gotta get like we're everything, all is good now, but we want to not pay too many taxes when we're older either, because of what we just talked about, like all those mandatory withdrawals, like the RRSP withdrawals were crazy because it's a percentage, right? So if you've got a big enough nest egg, it's a massive amount you're taking out.
Absolutely, and I have clients that need to take out $70,000 a year, and they have enough. They have enough money to live on. They don't need that, so they'll take out the 70, and 35 goes to the government.
Yeah, which is sad, right? Because they could have taken that money out. Like if they, I guess, came to you earlier, right? They could have structured it in a way where maybe they took some of the RRSP money earlier before their CPP and OAS hit. So now they're they're enjoying their lifestyle, and also there's a good chance they're healthier at that point too, right? Where you're younger, you can travel, so you're using some of the RRSP money. For like an earlier retirement, right? And then when the, and then CPP OAS hits, and it's helping you cover your non-discretionary expenses, things like that. So
that's right. And business owners, a lot of my clients are business owners, and they're in a position where they're able to save money in their business, and that in many ways could be a better option than actually making any kind of RRSPs. But we go through that analysis with our clients to see what's the optimal place to save money,
right,
from a tax point of view. And in many cases, RRSPs are not necessarily the best vehicle for savings, and that's especially true for business owners.
Yeah, the business owners, that's a whole other animal there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Completely different financial planning for business owners than it is for employees, let's say,
Yeah, but I mean, their menu of options is nice, at least, right? You can try different things. Yeah. So no, that's great. All right, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this episode with John. Remember that if you want some unbiased answers from John, or are considering maybe having him take a look at your financials like he did with us to see if you're on the right track to retire or ensure your finances are actually optimized, then you can sign up for a free consultation with him by going to buildwealthcanada.com. buildwealthcanada.ca/John. So that's just JOHN. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/John. And once again, there's no obligation or anything like that. And I had a great experience with John, so I know you will as well. All right. And of course, once again, a big thanks to paytm.ca for sponsoring the episode. And don't forget to try out Paytm on your phone or tablet for free to get the $10 off any bill that you're paying. Just go to paytm.ca, download the app, select the bill you want to pay, and use the promo code BUILDWEALTH, all lowercase, all one word, to get a free $10 cash back on that bill. They've had some incredible giveaway prizes. Like I said, recently they had the 2 iPhone 10s that they gave away, and they even gave away an all-inclusive vacation just for people paying their bills through the app. So download the app to be in the loop about all future giveaways like this, and I wish you the best. All right, so that's all for today. A big thanks once again to our sponsor, paytm.ca. Have a wonderful week and talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.